Hello and welcome to episode 2 of The Gaming Journey. Now if you remember our first episode, we took a look at the very first Final Fantasy game. This time's going to be a little bit different because we're not going to look at a game, we're going to look at something that seems to have become an issue of late. Today we're talking about both DLC and game length. Now, first thing to remember when it comes to judging a game solely by length is that it's actually a very poor representation as to whether or not a game is going to be worth your money. Take a game like, say, God of War, or Uncharted, or even something like Portal. All of these are relatively short games compared to, say, a 20 or 30 hour RPG, but doesn't mean they're any more or less worth the money. In fact, nowadays in modern games, I think the problem has become that games are trying to put too much into a game. So you essentially have what amounts to a 200 or 300 hour slog through side quests that makes the game feel more like an MMO than an actual fully fleshed out experience. It's much more important to have a goal in mind in your game, as opposed to every single game being that open sandbox. Now when it's done well, it is a good experience. But let's be honest, most sandbox games are not, quote, done well. In fact, more often than not, I will play a, quote, sandbox game and wish it was just a little bit more linear. Now, some gamers may call that hand-holdy or they don't like it, but the bottom line is many of the best games ever made were, quote, linear. And I feel like solely using a game's length to judge whether or not it's worth the money honestly dismisses a lot of what makes a game good or bad. Now, the game that actually made me bring up this point is a game that just recently came out, Evolve. A lot of people were on it for the length of content, but let's be honest. We knew what this game was as soon as we saw the first trailer. Basically, if you don't have 4 friends to play it with, it's probably not going to be that fun of an experience for you. And so solely judging it by the length you can play it, I know games you can speed run in an hour and a half that I would frankly think are far more valuable than games you can slog forward for hundreds of hours. And a larger issue Evolve brought up was the issue of DLC, in particular Day 1 DLC. Now you see, once upon a time the attitude pretty much held by everybody in the industry is that Day 1 DLC is always bad. However, since then we've all grown up a little bit, we've done a little bit of research, and we understand where most of that comes from. Now yes, games like Rome Total War 2, Mass Effect 3, games that clearly have ripped chunks out of the main game to be sold to you on the first day as DLC, yes, that's bullshit and we're always going to call it as such. But for example, going back to Evolve, you have hats, glasses, skins for characters. None of this actually affects the game and none of it has been ripped out. This is what the art team was doing while the game was being polished, because let's be honest, during the polishing of a game, there's really nothing the art team can do except this very thing. Now that doesn't mean you have to give a free pass to every piece of DLC you see Day 1. I, for example, take umbrage with the idea of season passes, as if the game just assumes I'm going to want to have to load another 20 or 30 or even 40 in some cases dollars on the promise that there will be DLC later. I'll be honest, I've never really been a big fan of that, and I would rather just judge each DLC by itself. And I think with Evolve that's what happened. People saw that there were 2 different types of season passes along with all the aesthetic things, and they flipped their shit. Now, I can't argue with that point. I can't really say you're wrong, because when it comes to DLC, it's really each to their own. I always look at DLC, yes, it can be a problem if, again, it's ripped right out of the game. If you feel like you're missing part of the experience because you didn't pre-order, or if you feel like you're watching something and then clearly it cuts away before it was supposed to, as if the scene continues if you have more content, well then yes, obviously that is going to be incorrect and everyone's going to call it on it. However, when it comes to all DLC, if you don't like it, there's a very simple solution. Don't buy it. In fact, the main problem gaming has when it comes to many of the traits we consider bad is because we buy it. Trust me, if a DLC completely fails, the company will look to other ways to make money. Because yes, to us, gaming is a hobby, it's an escape from our day-to-day lives, but to them, it's just business. That's all it is. They want to do whatever it takes to make the most money. And right at the moment, that cheap cash grab, it works. Now, going through the future, does that mean we can stop looking at games for DLC practices? Of course not. We must always be vigilant and make sure we're not getting screwed. However, I would ask that before we, as a community, flail at just the mere mention of the idea of DLC or season passes, let's at least make sure we do our research, double check things, and don't end up looking like a bunch of screaming fanboys. I'm not the first one to point this out when it comes to Evolve either. In fact, YouTuber Total Biscuit did an entire 18-minute video just discussing the DLC practice. And I would highly advise you check that video out if you haven't already. I will link it down below. Now, as per what the gaming journey is going to be going forward, I've been speaking to a lot of you on Twitter and Facebook, and we have decided that the best way for this series to go forward is, rather than focus on one particular game, we're going to focus on a series of games, or a franchise, per episode. I've been getting a lot of feedback from you guys about where you want to see the series going, and let me just first and foremost say I greatly appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on The Gaming Journey.